For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On the morning of March 15, 1998, 23-year-old Nathan Sullivan left his friend's apartment in Mexico City's vibrant Colonia, Roma neighborhood. The Arizona State University art student was eager to purchase supplies for his muralism studies at a local market just 3 blocks away. He never arrived. Despite an extensive investigation involving both Mexican and American authorities, Nathan seemed to vanish into the busy streets of one of the world's largest cities. Security footage showed him entering a small shop near the market, but after that, the trail went cold. For 22 years, his family lived with agonizing uncertainty, clinging to hope while fearing the worst. Then, in September 2020, during a routine renovation in Colonia, Roma, construction workers made a chilling discovery beneath an old shop floor. This is the complete investigation into what happened to Nathan Sullivan. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this content, consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Now let's continue. On a warm spring morning in 1998, Nathan Sullivan stepped out of his friend's apartment in Mexico City's vibrant Colonia, Roma neighborhood, carrying nothing but his worn leather sketchbook and a small backpack. The 23-year-old Arizona State University student had arrived in Mexico just 2 weeks earlier, driven by his passion for Mexican muralism and a desire to complete his final art project before graduation. The security camera footage from that morning, now grainy and faded with time, shows Nathan walking confidently down Alvaro Obregón Avenue, stopping occasionally to sketch the Art Deco buildings that line the street. At 10:47 a.m., he entered a small art supply shop near the local market, a seemingly routine errand that would become the last confirmed sighting of Nathan Sullivan. Earlier that morning, Nathan had shared breakfast with his college friend, Michael Torres, discussing their plans to visit the Diego Rivera murals later that week. He was in such good spirits, Torres would later tell investigators. He talked about how this trip was exactly what he needed before graduating, how the city's energy was inspiring his work. He just needed some new brushes and canvas for his project. When Nathan failed to return for their planned lunch meeting at 1:00 p.m., Torres wasn't immediately concerned. Artists could lose track of time, and Nathan had always been particularly prone to wandering off when inspiration struck. But as afternoon turned to evening, and Nathan's phone went straight to voicemail, worry began to set in. The shop owner, Armando Vega, would tell police that Nathan had browsed for about 20 minutes before leaving through the back exit, claiming he wanted to explore the market's smaller alleys. But security footage never showed Nathan emerging from either exit, and no other market vendors recalled seeing the tall, fair-haired American that day. By nightfall, Torres had contacted the local police. Officer Rosa Mendez, who would later become captain and lead investigator on the case, arrived at the shop at 9:45 p.m. Her initial report noted the peculiar layout of the store, with its maze-like arrangement of shelves and a back door that opened into a narrow alley. The witness statements don't align, she wrote in her preliminary findings. The shop owner's account contains inconsistencies that warrant further investigation. The first 48 hours after Nathan's disappearance were crucial. Police conducted door-to-door interviews throughout Colonia, Roma, while American embassy officials worked to coordinate with Mexican authorities. Nathan's parents, James and Margaret Sullivan, flew in from Phoenix, their faces haunting the local news as they pleaded for information about their son. Security footage from nearby businesses was meticulously reviewed. The cameras captured Nathan's entry into the shop from multiple angles, his distinctive red backpack visible against his black t-shirt. But after that moment, Nathan Sullivan seemed to vanish into thin air. The market vendors remembered that day for another reason. It was unusually quiet for a spring morning. Several stalls had been closed, and the usually bustling back alleys were eerily empty. One elderly vendor, Maria Gomez, recalled seeing a white van parked behind the art supply shop around noon, though she hadn't thought anything of it at the time. As the first week drew to a close, investigators had little to go on. Nathan's bank accounts remained untouched, his social media dormant. His sketchbook, which friends said he carried everywhere, was never found. The back exit of the shop, which Vega claimed Nathan had used, showed no signs of recent use, its rusty hinges and dust-covered threshold telling a different story than the owner's account. What began as a missing persons case would eventually unravel into something far more sinister. But in those first desperate days, Nathan Sullivan was simply another young traveler who had disappeared in a vast city of millions. His family couldn't know that the truth lay just feet below where they stood, behind a carefully concealed door in the basement of an ordinary art supply shop, where their son's final moments would remain hidden for more than 2 decades. As the investigation into Nathan Sullivan's disappearance intensified, Captain Rosa Mendez found herself drawn deeper into the peculiarities of the case. The art supply shop, with its cramped aisles and dim lighting, became the focal point of her investigation. Something about the owner, Armando Vega, set off warning signals in her experienced mind. Vega was cooperative on the surface, walking investigators through his small shop multiple times. He maintained his story about Nathan leaving through the back exit, but his account grew more detailed with each telling, adding elements that hadn't been mentioned in his initial statement. First, it was simply that Nathan had left. Then he remembered Nathan saying he wanted to explore the market. Later, he recalled Nathan specifically mentioning looking for traditional pigments from local vendors. The security footage told a different story. Technical analysts spent days reviewing recordings from every camera in a 5-block radius. They tracked Nathan's movement from the moment he left his friend's apartment until he entered Vega's shop. But the critical footage from the shop's own security system proved unusable. Vega claimed a power surge had damaged the recording that day, a convenient malfunction that Mendez found suspicious. Local vendors were interviewed extensively. None could corroborate Vega's story about Nathan exploring the market's back alleys. Maria Gomez's account of the white van became a point of interest, but without a license plate or additional witnesses, the lead went nowhere. The usually bustling market had been unusually quiet that day, with several regular vendors absent, another detail that nagged at Mendez's investigative instincts. The U.S. Embassy became involved, sending liaison officers to work with Mexican authorities. They brought resources and international attention, but also complicated the investigation with bureaucratic hurdles and competing jurisdictions. Nathan's parents worked tirelessly with both Mexican and American authorities, their presence a constant reminder of the human stakes in the investigation. Mendez ordered a thorough search of the shop, but nothing seemed out of place. The back exit, despite Vega's claims, showed clear signs of long-term disuse. Forensic teams found no traces of blood or signs of struggle. The shop's layout was photographed and mapped, with particular attention paid to the storage areas and the loading dock where the mysterious white van had been spotted. The investigation expanded to include background checks on Vega and his employees. His record was clean, almost too clean, Mendez would later note. He had owned the shop for 15 years, maintained regular business hours, and had no prior complaints. His fingerprints weren't in any database, and his documentation was impeccable. It was as if Armando Vega had appeared out of nowhere 15 years earlier, fully formed as a respectable business owner. As days turned into weeks, the investigation began to stall. Nathan's bank accounts remained untouched, his credit cards unused. His phone never connected to any cell towers after entering the shop. The Mexican authorities expanded their search to other neighborhoods, other cities, but found nothing. Missing persons flyers with Nathan's photo became a common sight throughout Colonia Roma, his smiling face a reminder of the unsolved mystery. The case took its toll on everyone involved. Captain Mendez spent countless hours reviewing evidence, convinced they were missing something crucial. The Sullivan family's hope began to fade, though they remained in Mexico City far longer than they had planned, unable to leave while any chance remained of finding their son. By the end of the first month, the active investigation began to wind down. Without new leads or evidence, there was little more that could be done. The case file grew thick with interviews, reports, and dead ends, but no concrete answers emerged. Nathan Sullivan had walked into a small art supply shop on a spring morning and vanished, leaving behind only questions and a growing sense that something far more sinister than a simple disappearance had occurred in that unremarkable store in Colonia, Roma. As summer faded into autumn in 1998, the investigation into Nathan Sullivan's disappearance gradually lost momentum. The once bustling command center in Mexico City's police headquarters grew quiet, the wall of leads and photographs slowly being dismantled as other cases demanded attention. Captain Rosa Mendez found herself making fewer calls to the Sullivan family, each conversation more difficult than the last as she had no progress to report. The media's interest waned as well. Nathan's story, which had once dominated local headlines and attracted coverage from major American networks, became relegated to occasional mentions in articles about tourist safety in Mexico City. The missing persons posters that had papered Colonia, Roma began to fade and tear, Nathan's hopeful smile becoming ghost-like against the weathered paper. James and Margaret Sullivan finally returned to Phoenix in late October, their savings depleted from 4 months of staying in Mexico City. They left behind a private investigator they could barely afford, but they couldn't bear to completely abandon the search for their son. Margaret's last words to Captain Mendez were haunting. "Please don't let Nathan become just another file in your cabinet." Throughout 1999, scattered leads emerged only to dissolve under scrutiny. A student in Guadalajara claimed to have seen Nathan in a cafe, but security footage proved it was a case of mistaken identity. A tip about a young American man matching Nathan's description working in Oaxaca led nowhere. Each false hope left the investigation further demoralized. The art supply shop remained open, with Armando Vega continuing his daily routine as if nothing had happened. He maintained his original story during periodic follow-up interviews, never wavering from his account despite its inconsistencies. Captain Mendez kept tabs on him, but without evidence of wrongdoing, there was little she could do beyond occasional surveillance. By 2000, the case file had grown thick with dead ends. Other young tourists had gone missing in Mexico City during this period: 3 American students, a Canadian photographer, and 2 European backpackers. While investigators noted the pattern, they couldn't establish concrete connections between the cases. Each disappearance had its own unique circumstances, its own grieving family, its own cold trail. The Sullivan family marked each passing year with renewed pleas for information, but their press conferences attracted fewer reporters, their appeals for help echoing in half-empty rooms. They established a scholarship in Nathan's name at Arizona State University, ensuring that his passion for art would live on even as hope of finding him dimmed. Captain Mendez never fully let go of the case. Even as her career advanced and new investigations demanded her attention, she kept Nathan's file in her desk drawer, reviewing it periodically for anything they might have missed. The grainy security footage of Nathan entering the shop became seared in her memory, the last known moments of a young man with dreams of art and adventure. The years crept by, and technology advanced. By 2010, new digital systems had replaced the old security cameras around Colonia, Roma. The art supply shop modernized too, though Vega remained steadfastly traditional in his methods. The market where Nathan had vanished changed as well, with new vendors replacing the old, memory of that quiet spring morning in 1998 fading like the missing persons posters that had once been so prominent. What no one could know then was that the truth lay literally beneath their feet, waiting to be discovered. The answers to Nathan's disappearance, along with those of others who had vanished, were sealed behind concrete and silence in a basement that would remain hidden for another decade. While the case grew cold above ground, the evidence remained preserved below, waiting for the day when renovation work would finally bring the horrifying truth to light. In January 2020, the face of Colonia Roma had changed dramatically from the neighborhood Nathan Sullivan had visited 22 years earlier. Trendy cafes and boutiques had replaced many of the traditional shops, and the old art supply store, long closed after Armando Vega's death in 2015, was slated for renovation into a modern gallery space. The construction crew began their work on a cold Monday morning, breaking through old tile and concrete to update the building's plumbing system. By mid-afternoon, their jackhammers had exposed something unexpected, a section of flooring that rang hollow when struck. The crew chief, Miguel Hernandez, noticed inconsistencies in the building's original blueprints, showing no record of any subterranean structure. What they discovered beneath the false floor would shake Mexico City's law enforcement community to its core. A narrow staircase, concealed beneath decades of careful camouflage, led to a basement roughly the size of the shop above. The air that rushed up from the opening carried the unmistakable smell of decay, causing several workers to recoil. Police arrived within the hour, and Dr. Carlos Ramirez, the city's leading forensic pathologist, descended into the darkness. The basement, he would later write in his report, had been meticulously organized. Medical equipment lined one wall, surgical tables, monitoring devices, and preservation units, all dating back to the late 1990s. But it was the personal effects that told the most chilling story. In a series of lockers along the far wall, investigators found belongings that would finally answer questions that had haunted families for decades. A worn leather sketchbook, its pages filled with Nathan Sullivan's distinctive artwork, lay beside his red backpack. Next to these, other bags and personal items told similar stories. A Canadian photographer's camera, still containing undeveloped film, a German backpacker's travel journal, a Spanish student's passport. The basement held more than just belongings. Behind a false wall, Dr. Ramirez's team discovered human remains, carefully hidden and preserved in a manner that suggested medical knowledge. Among them, dental records would confirm, were Nathan Sullivan's remains, along with those of 6 other individuals who had vanished between 1997 and 2000. Captain Rosa Mendez, now nearing retirement, arrived at the scene as the first evidence bags were being carried out. She recognized Nathan's sketchbook immediately, its pages still containing the architectural drawings he had made on that spring morning in 1998. The discovery brought a flood of memories, the endless hours spent searching, the desperate phone calls with the Sullivan family, the nagging feeling that they had missed something crucial. The basement revealed sophisticated surgical equipment and preservation systems, suggesting a well-organized operation rather than the work of a single perpetrator. Documentation found in a locked cabinet pointed to a broader conspiracy: medical records, transport schedules, and financial transactions that painted a picture of an international organ trafficking ring operating under the cover of a simple art supply shop. As news of the discovery spread, families of the missing began arriving in Mexico City. The Sullivan family flew in from Phoenix, their first return to the city since 1998. Margaret Sullivan, now in her 70s, stood silently at the police barrier, watching as investigators continued to process the scene that had held her son's fate for so many years. The basement yielded its secrets slowly over the following weeks. Each item cataloged, each document analyzed, added to the growing understanding of what had transpired beneath the quiet shop. The medical equipment, the surgical supplies, and the meticulous records pointed to a sophisticated operation that had preyed on young tourists, turning a simple art supply shop into a front for unimaginable horrors. For Captain Mendez and her team, the discovery brought mixed emotions, relief at finally understanding what had happened to Nathan and the others, but also frustration at how long the truth had remained literally buried beneath their feet. The basement secrets would eventually lead to the arrests of surviving members of the trafficking ring, but for now, it stood as a grim reminder of the darkness that had lurked beneath the surface of everyday life in Colonia Roma. As evidence from the basement continued to emerge, Jennifer Martinez arrived from Interpol's Human Trafficking Division, bringing 15 years of experience investigating organ trafficking networks across Latin America. Her presence transformed the investigation scope, shifting focus from a series of disappearances to an organized criminal enterprise that had operated with clinical precision. Martinez immediately recognized the sophistication of the operation. The medical equipment found in the basement wasn't standard black market gear. It represented top-tier surgical technology from the late 1990s, the kind typically found only in advanced transplant centers. The preservation units, she noted, were specifically designed for maintaining organs during transport, suggesting connections to legitimate medical facilities. The basement itself told a story of meticulous planning. Unlike typical criminal hideouts, this space had been designed with surgical precision. The ventilation system, hidden behind false walls, could have supported lengthy medical procedures. The drainage system had been modified to handle medical waste. Even the electrical wiring had been professionally installed to support the power requirements of surgical equipment. Dr. Carlos Ramirez's forensic team worked methodically through the crime scene, documenting every detail. The victim's remains showed evidence of skilled surgical intervention, clean incisions, professional suturing, and systematic organ removal. This wasn't the work of underground butchers, but trained medical professionals who had turned their expertise to criminal purposes. Captain Mendez and Martinez focused on reconstructing the operation's timeline through the recovered documents. Records indicated that Armando Vega had purchased the building in 1996, but his real estate transaction had been handled through a series of shell companies. The renovation work that created the basement had been done slowly, over months, to avoid attracting attention. The investigation team discovered that Vega's art supply business had been the perfect cover. The shop's irregular hours could be explained by art supply deliveries. The white van witnessed by Maria Gomez years ago now took on new significance. Similar vehicles appeared in shipping manifests, disguised as supply deliveries, but arriving at unusual hours. Most disturbing were the medical records found in the basement's filing cabinet. Each victim had been carefully screened through stolen medical records, their blood types and tissue compatibility documented. Nathan Sullivan's file contained detailed notes about his excellent health and ideal surgical candidacy, along with a tissue typing report dated the day of his disappearance. Martinez's analysis revealed connections to medical facilities across Mexico and into the United States. The trafficking ring had developed an elaborate system for matching organs with recipients, using a network of corrupt medical professionals who could facilitate illegal transplants. The prices listed in their records were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars for each successful organ placement. The basement's evidence pointed to at least 3 doctors who had participated in the illegal surgeries. Their signatures appeared on various documents, though they had used code names. The surgical notes were professional and detailed, suggesting the procedures had been performed with the same care as legal transplant operations. As the investigation deepened, patterns emerged in the victim selection. The ring had specifically targeted young, healthy tourists, people whose disappearances would be complicated by international jurisdictions and who had no local connections. Each victim had been carefully observed before being taken, their routines documented, their vulnerabilities noted. DNA analysis of the basement revealed traces of multiple individuals beyond those whose remains were found. Blood patterns and cellular material suggested that many more victims had passed through the facility. The trafficking ring had operated with horrifying efficiency, processing victims quickly and disposing of evidence methodically. The breakthrough came when Martinez connected the basement's surgical equipment to a series of bulk purchases made through a medical supply company in 1997. The company's records led to a form, our hospital administrator who had helped establish the trafficking network. Under questioning, he began to reveal the organization's structure and the identities of its key members. What emerged was a complex criminal enterprise that had operated under the noses of authorities for years. The art supply shop had been just one node in a larger network, but it had been crucial, a place where victims could be taken quietly, processed efficiently, and made to disappear without trace. The investigation was no longer about finding one missing student. It had become about exposing a sophisticated criminal organization that had turned human tragedy into cold profit. The breakthrough in the Sullivan case came through an unexpected source, a shipping manifest from 1997. While analyzing records from the basement, Jennifer Martinez noticed a pattern in medical equipment deliveries that didn't match any legitimate hospital's procurement schedule. The equipment, worth millions of dollars, had been purchased through a series of shell companies, all leading back to one name, Dr. Felipe Montero, a former transplant surgeon at Mexico City's largest private hospital. When questioned, Montero cracked under the weight of 2 decades of guilt. He revealed how Armando Vega had approached him in 1996 with an opportunity to make life-changing money by helping establish a private organ transplant operation. What began as a side operation quickly evolved into a sophisticated criminal enterprise, with Vega's art supply shop serving as the perfect front for their activities. The basement facility had been meticulously designed to Montero's specifications. Every piece of equipment, every surgical tool, had been chosen for its reliability and portability. The operation worked with clockwork precision. Victims were carefully selected, processed through the basement facility, and their organs transported to private clinics across Mexico and the United States. Nathan Sullivan's case finally came into sharp focus. According to Montero's testimony, Nathan had accidentally discovered the truth while using the shop's bathroom. He had heard sounds from the basement and investigated, finding himself face to face with evidence of the trafficking operation. His attempt to escape had ended tragically. Vega had subdued him, and within hours, he became another victim of their brutal enterprise. The recovered medical records painted a disturbing picture of the operation's scope. Each victim had been treated as a commodity, their organs cataloged and matched to waiting recipients who had paid premium prices for no questions asked transplants. The ring had maintained detailed records of every transaction, every surgery, every delivery, their very precision now providing the evidence needed to dismantle their network. Martinez's team identified 5 key members of the trafficking ring still alive and operating. Among them was Dr. Gabriel Santos, a respected surgeon who had performed countless legitimate transplants while moonlighting for the criminal enterprise. His arrest at a private clinic in Guadalajara sent shockwaves through Mexico's medical community. The investigation revealed how the operation had evolved over time. What started in Vega's basement had expanded into a sophisticated network spanning multiple countries. They had corrupted hospital administrators, transport companies, and even some law enforcement officials. The organization had grown so confident in their security that they had kept detailed records of every transaction records that now served as evidence of their crimes. DNA analysis of the basement revealed the full horror of their operation. Beyond the 7 sets of remains discovered, Forensic evidence suggested that dozens more victims had passed through the facility. Each victim represented not just a lost life, but a family left without answers, a future stolen for profit. The financial records proved equally damning. Offshore accounts revealed millions of dollars in transactions, each carefully disguised as legitimate medical consultations or equipment purchases. The money trail led investigators to corrupt medical professionals in 3 countries, all of whom had participated in the illegal transplant network. Captain Mendez, reviewing the evidence with Martinez, finally understood why the original investigation had hit so many dead ends. The trafficking ring had infiltrated key positions in law enforcement, subtly, derailing investigations that came too close to the truth. Even some of the dead ends in Nathan's case had been deliberately planted to mislead investigators. Most chilling were the personal notes found in Vega's private files. He had kept detailed observations about potential victims, including Nathan. The notes revealed how they had watched their targets, learning their routines and habits before making their move. Nathan's artistic interests had made him an ideal target, someone who would naturally be drawn to a small art supply shop off the tourist path. The breakthrough brought a wave of arrests across Mexico and the United States. 5 key members of the trafficking ring were taken into custody within days of each other. The evidence from the basement medical records, financial documents, and DNA analysis provided prosecutors with an airtight case against the organization. For the Sullivan family, the revelations brought a terrible clarity to their 22 years of uncertainty. They finally knew what had happened to their son, though the truth was far more horrifying than anything they had imagined. Nathan's final moments, his desperate attempt to escape, and his tragic end were no longer mysteries, but part of a larger story of organized crime and medical corruption that had claimed dozens of victims. In the spring of 2021, Mexico City's largest courtroom fell silent as Judge Maria Elena Ortiz delivered the verdicts. 5 members of one of Mexico's most sophisticated organ trafficking rings faced justice, more than 2 decades after their crimes began in a basement beneath an art supply shop in Colonia, Roma. Dr. Gabriel Santos, once respected in Mexico's medical community, stood expressionless as he received a 40-year sentence for his role in performing illegal organ harvesting surgeries. His colleagues, Dr. Ramon Vargas, Dr. Luis Mendoza, and hospital administrator Patricia Fuentes, received similar sentences. Jorge Vega, Armando's nephew and the ring's transport coordinator, was sentenced to 30 years. The evidence from the basement had proven insurmountable. Detailed surgical records, financial transactions, and DNA evidence painted a picture of an operation that had claimed at least 36 lives over 3 years. The medical precision of their enterprise had ultimately been their undoing. Their meticulous record-keeping provided prosecutors with everything needed for conviction. For the Sullivan family, the verdicts brought a complex mixture of relief and renewed grief. Margaret Sullivan, now in her 70s, attended each day of the trial, finally hearing the full account of her son's final hours. Nathan had died trying to save others, attempting to escape and alert authorities after discovering captives in the basement. His actions, though ultimately tragic, had been heroic. The case transformed Mexico City's approach to missing persons investigations. Captain Rosa Mendez, before her retirement, helped establish new protocols for cases involving foreign nationals. The city created a specialized unit focused on human trafficking, with enhanced training in recognizing signs of organ trafficking operations. The basement itself became a grim reminder of institutional failure. The building was eventually demolished, and in its place, the city established a memorial garden. A bronze plaque bears the names of all identified victims, with Nathan's artistic signature incorporated into the design, a final tribute to the young artist whose disappearance ultimately exposed the trafficking ring. Jennifer Martinez's investigation, continued to ripple through the medical community. 17 doctors across 3 countries faced charges for their roles in receiving and transplanting illegally harvested organs. The case led to stricter international protocols for organ transplant documentation and enhanced scrutiny of private clinics. The Sullivan family established the Nathan Sullivan Foundation, dedicated to supporting art students and raising awareness about trafficking risks among young travelers. The foundation's annual scholarship sends promising artists to study abroad, though now with comprehensive safety training and support systems in place. Dr. Carlos Ramirez's forensic findings became a cornerstone of international training programs. His detailed analysis of the basement facility helped authorities identify similar operations in other countries, leading to the disruption of 3 other trafficking networks within 2 years. The market vendors who had known Nathan gathered on the first anniversary of the verdicts, holding a memorial that blended Mexican and American traditions. Maria Gomez, now in her 80s, finally understood why that spring morning in 1998 had felt so wrong, why the white van had haunted her memories for so long. Captain Mendez retired shortly after the trial, but not before completing one final task, personally returning Nathan's sketchbook to his parents. The pages, preserved in the basement's controlled environment, still contained his final drawings of Colonia Roma's architecture, innocent sketches made moments before his life took its tragic turn. The case's resolution brought changes to Mexico's organ donation system, with new safeguards and tracking mechanisms implemented nationwide. The Health Ministry established a task force dedicated to investigating suspicious transplant activities, ensuring that legitimate organ donations wouldn't be tainted by criminal enterprises. Today, the Memorial Garden stands as both a warning and a promise, a reminder of the darkness that can hide behind ordinary facades, and a commitment to ensuring such crimes never again go undetected for so long. Nathan Sullivan's story, and those of his fellow victims, became a catalyst for change, their tragic endings helping to prevent future losses.